Welcome back to this episode of the Psychedelic Mom podcast. I am here today with Brittney Hartley, and I'm so excited to have this conversation with you, Brittney. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great. It's a pleasure to be here.
I first came across you on Angelo DeLulla's website. I saw your interview with him, and I see Angelo as a teacher and a guide who I've also interviewed on this podcast because I love his direct pointings to whatever we want to call this universe reality and moving out of dogma and taking ideas that come from structured religion. This direct pointing has been an interesting process for me. And I saw you there with just a clear and direct way of communicating your own deconstruction process. And so I look at you and I think we've had different lives, we're different ages, but we have so many similarities. We both have 4 children. You came from Mormonism, I came from a Catholic religion. We both went through deep deconstruction process of what it means to be a mother, a woman, what spirituality is, who God is. We both ended up on a path using psychedelics. I would say for me, there's partly this process of deconstruction. They helped me deconstruct, actually. And then the reconstruction process through psychedelics. So I'd love to dive in today to your story about religion, God, your own process, what's happening in this time of post-religion. So I'm happy to have you here today to dive into all these things. So why don't we start with what spirituality is for you, what it used to be, what it is.
Spirituality to me now just means connection. So, connection to your deepest self and connection outside of self. For many people, including me growing up, that outside of self included a supernatural element, included a God. That's not the way that I see connection now. I don't see that as a necessary piece of spirituality or connection. So you're right, I was raised Mormon, I was raised LDS, and deconstructed a little bit at a time. You can't do it all at once. The brain is only capable of changing your worldview 1% at a time. So I deconstructed Mormonism when I was a teenager and was kicked out of my home, kind of fell into nuanced Christianity, deconstructed Christianity. I was in theology school. I was really thinking deeply about these things. I was reading a lot. I was studying a lot. I was deconstructing the Bible, I was deconstructing Christianity, and then I was deconstructing religion, and then I was deconstructing God, and then I was deconstructing the illusion of the self, and then I was deconstructing free will, until essentially there was the void. There was really nothing left. And it was, for some people, they seem to move through that place fairly easily and just say, oh, I'm just going to make the best out of the life that I have. And they become kind of optimistic nihilists, or they just genuinely enjoy life. I was not one of those people. I was moody and broody and depressed and having an existential crisis about the whole thing. But I found many tools along the way, especially in all of the work that I've done with mystics and spirituality, and I found tools that help me to understand that place and find some footing and do some rebuilding until I went from being actually suicidal to genuinely enjoying that I'm alive. My work now as an atheist spiritual director is to help people wherever they are on that deconstruction to reconstruction process.
I have another friend that has a podcast, and her term is unbecoming. Kind of to become. So how would you define what deconstruction is? Because there's like what it is, and then there's what it actually feels like.
Yes.
So let's talk about both. And how would you describe deconstruction?
It really is a process of unlearning, and the reason that it's difficult from the point of view of experience, and I love that you ask the experience question of it, because sometimes in this space, when you're really talking about philosophy like absurdism and stoicism and nihilism and all these things, it can get very heady where we're just defining definitions. And I love this female element that you're bringing to this conversation of what did it feel like? And it feels like dying, because every piece of information that you're unlearning is is a part of you and created a part of your identity. And so with each piece that you realize the truth isn't what you thought it was, a piece of you dies. And it genuinely feels like dying. And when you get to whatever that end of that process is for you, you do feel like, I'm a newborn baby, naked in the universe. I don't know who I am. I don't know what the hell is going on. I don't know up from down. I don't know how to make a decision. And then like for you and me, like we're adults and we have children, like we're supposed to have our shit together.
We're supposed to have some answers.
Our kids are asking us questions and we know less about what's going on than at any other time in our lives because we've just stripped away everything and we're essentially just kind of floating in the void. So at the point of view of experience, it feels like dying. And I can look back at it now and see the sacredness of this place and all of our stories and the hero's journey and the heroine's journey, all of our story archetypes. You know, the hero has to go to his deepest, darkest cave and face his fears. And even in religion, the dark night of the soul is the most sacred place in religion. So we can look back and you can add some beauty to it and you can talk about, you know, a phoenix that dies but then is reborn. We have all this symbolism around us. But yet when you're in it, it feels like you're dying. You're dead. You're walking around like a zombie and you're dead.
I remember having some nights where I'm like, I feel like I'm dying, not like should call 911, like I'm not having a heart attack. But my body is like physically on fire in a way that I feel physically like I'm dying. Did you have those sensorial sensations of feeling like...
Yeah, I didn't quite have that fire feeling, although the symbolism behind that is very interesting. Mine felt more like if the floor dropped from underneath me, it wouldn't surprise me. It was like a groundlessness in my experience where I was floating around, just walking around, really disconnected to my body, really disconnected to the world and other people, kind of feeling like you're in the Truman Show. Totally. And you're just having to walk around because everybody else seems like they're really in the Truman Show. And you're just kind of like, well, I guess I'll just walk around with everyone else here. And so mine was
and they don't really want to talk about death. Like, does anybody want to know that I feel like I'm dying over here? And it's
does anyone know? Like, is anyone?
It's like, what's for dinner?
Grappling with the fact that we don't have free will and we don't know what's going on here, and we're all gonna die, and like you feel like you just want to scream it. Yeah, and everybody's like, "What's for dinner?" And you're like, "How the hell can you think about dinner at a time like this? Like, I am dying." It was more like that. It was more feeling like I was just floating around in the Truman Show, very dissociated. Mine was much more of a dissociation. Yeah. So I didn't feel like I was really in my body except for playing like a video game character. So mine had a very big disconnection, which psychedelics helps with a lot, by the way.
Yeah. And I think that partly why I was feeling my body was because I had used psychedelics. And at some point prior to this death process, my body had become mine again. My body was something I was inhabiting again. And it was so interesting to go through that process because for someone that didn't even realize that I had disassociated from my body as we do as women, as Westerners, suddenly to be back in my body was to notice every subtle, intimate sensation. That can be beautiful and it can be terrifying when you're going through a egoic death process. And I remember calling Angelo at one point saying, I feel like I'm dying. And he's like, yeah, that's normal.
Yeah.
Like, no. You don't understand. It's right on track.
When I meet with clients now who explain that they're in this space, I get very excited because I know we're at the hard part. I know that it's hard, but I get excited because I know what's around the corner. I know what could be around the corner, which, leaning into your authenticity, returning to your body, really focusing your life on what you want to do at the level of experience, being brave and making some of these big changes that really can improve the quality of your life. And I know that's around the corner, even though the person in it feels like they're dying. But I'll have that same response where I get excited because I know that it's part of the process now. Whereas when I was in it, it felt like I'm going to be in this forever. I'm just staying alive for my children. And I'm sure you've had that thought too.
Yes. I never thought I'd have those thoughts though. Like they weren't.
No, me neither.
They weren't familiar to me. I always think of myself as someone who was always pretty joyful until I realized that a lot of that was just the Truman, the Truman character. So if someone said to you, what do you mean you got to this point of deconstructing the self? Because even that is such a radical understanding or realization that is hard for someone to comprehend. What do you mean you deconstructed the self?
Yeah, so for me, it was a lot of kind of philosophy and neuroscience and trying to understand what I was, especially after the death of God for me. And it was really digging into this illusion that we have of this ego that I'm a Brittney and I like these things and I don't like these things and I'm good at this and I'm bad at this and this is me. When we realize that we don't choose that, that's something that we discover and that's something that we explore and that's something that's flexible. And even the thought that I'm making a choice here, this illusion that like I'm a me and I'm going to choose to do this. We know from neuroscience that that decision was already made in your subconscious, and we create this kind of shortcut that I'm a person and I chose this. But the math was already done in the dark of our attention. And for me, that was disorienting at first. It was a little bit psychologically unhinging because you start to feel like you're a robot that you can't control, that something else is pulling the strings. There's ways to navigate that space. There's ways to make peace with that. There's ways to even find beauty in exploring the universe that is you, that you will never fully understand all the things that are going on in your subconscious. There's a whole universe inside your brain with a history as ancient as time itself that you can explore. And for me now, that's exciting. I can handle that. But when I was first wrestling with it, it felt very disorienting, especially in the context of free will.
For someone who said, well, wait a second, she's talking about the universe and consciousness and this part of ourselves that's a mystery that we could potentially never understand. And yet she just said she's an atheist. So could you describe even your process of realization that there wasn't a God maybe in the way that you had been understood or taught, and then what you've come to believe now or in this present moment in time anyway?
Yeah, so when I say I'm an atheist, it's really for some people that has this connotation that I'm a materialist and I know what's going on with the universe and I have faith in this whole other thing going on over here. When really at its core, atheism is just looking at a specific theistic God, especially, the God of the West, the God of the Abrahamic religions. And for me, this isn't just like a glance. Like I spent my entire adult life studying, trying to make sense of, praying to, reading scriptures about this God, and not believing in it in the same way that most people don't believe in most gods, right? You can't believe in all the gods. We have hundreds of thousands of gods that we've worshipped. So for me, being an atheist is just saying, I'm not convinced of this God. And after that, it's incredibly open for me. Even on my social media posts, I really try hard to make no claims about what is going on with ultimate reality. I don't think that we're good at that game. I don't think that we're good with that question. Now, I can explore it. What do you think about this? What do you think about that? I'm leaning this way. But I don't have my identity attached to this is the way that I think these things are. Now, I can be in that flexible space now because a part of me that needed to have the truth died, right? That part of me died. And that was very painful and I had to mourn all of that. But the beauty after going through that and being able to let that go and make peace with the unknown is I can now play this really fun game, which is, hey, what the hell is going on with reality? And I'm floating over here. This is how I'm seeing things. But I know that I'm a heavily biased creature, that I'm not seeing things as they are. I'm seeing things in this evolutionary lens and this biased lens of my own history. And I'm talking to you and I want to get a sense of what's going on with your reality over here. And now we're essentially playing. We're playing the game of what's going on here. And I genuinely enjoy that game. And if I find out that there was one God that was real, or we never understand what is real, or a comet hits us next week, or whatever is actually going on, I don't know, but I'm enjoying playing the game of let's talk about it. Let's explore. Let's see if we can make sense of what's actually going on here. So for me, letting go of that identity piece of having to know or having to say, I believe in this God, or this thing has to be true, or this worldview has to be true so that I belong to this group of people, or so that I have an identity. All of that died for me. And it now gives me the freedom to explore and change my mind and learn new things. So an atheist for me doesn't mean I know what's going on in the universe. It's actually the intellectual humility to say I don't. But I really enjoy trying to explore it and make sense of it because it's the way that I play.
It's so fascinating, isn't it? Especially if you've been someone, and I'm sure you have been, who continued to ask the existential questions. You are on a spiritual path. You went to school for theology. I think you got to your dissertation maybe. And then was that it? And you couldn't even...
Yeah, I went all the way up to my PhD dissertation, and I was like, under the umbrella of theology of this particular God, I don't have anything to write about except a piece of paper that said I unlearned everything that I once learned, that thought I knew. I unbecame everything that was attached to the things that I thought I knew. I am now no one that knows nothing. And that would be my dissertation paper. So I still stopped right there. I just have to write something to be able to finish my PhD. It may be just for pure vanity. I'll go back sometime and finish it. I didn't have anything to write about in the end because I had unlearned everything. But the beauty of that is along the way, I had gained tools for making peace with the unknown. I had gained tools for making peace with a flexible identity. And wearing your identity, wearing my name, Brittney Hartley, like clothing, where I put them on for a specific purpose, but I can take them off at any time because these clothes are not me. It's just a tool that makes it easier to go about in society. So I still value the process, even though at the end, my dissertation was, I know nothing.
You know, it's interesting because the I know nothing, after thinking I was someone who knew so much, there is this process in the deconstruction process where I think you do get to, I don't know. I know less today than I ever thought I knew. I heard you say at one time, and I think this is an interesting thing to explore too, that when you had a feminist idea, even though you were leaving Mormonism, that's a really hard thing to do, and deconstructing, that it was some of the issues when you talked about women's issues where you got criticized the most. What do you think that's all about?
Yeah, I think because since the agricultural revolution, about 10,000 BC, it's really been men who, and not just men in general, but a specific kind of man, a priest class man, that writes history, that writes religion, that defines what spirituality is. That there is this subtle message in religion and outside of religion, in the East and the West. This isn't like Buddhism is not exempt from this. Nothing is exempt from this because this specific kind of man has held the pen for so long and defined what things are, that there's this implicit message that women are less than in some way, that there's something about femininity that is less than. And I had certainly internalized a lot of that. Theology is very male dominated. The writings in theology are all male dominated. Philosophy is male dominated. History, I was a history teacher before I did the work that I do now, all male dominated across the board. So a lot of my spirituality, even up to about 5 years ago, was really this kind of action oriented, like these are the things that I do for my physical health, for my relationship health, for my emotional health. And here's the list of things that I do for spirituality. Even outside of patriarchal religion, even after leaving Mormonism and Christianity, even if you just go on Instagram, there are the gurus who are being supported by the money that they're making in spirituality. They still have this thing where you wake up at 5 a.m., you do your ice bath, you do your stretching, you do your breathing, you go to the retreats, you go to Costa Rica, you do ayahuasca, you do this, you have this look, you have a man bun, you do these things, right? It's kind of this to-do list of things to do to be spiritual. And I still had that in my subconscious, really driving me, and had a lot of pressure that if I'm a spiritual director, I should be doing these things. And the really beautiful thing about rediscovering female mystics and the feminine in general is that women like you and me, we can't make a schedule every day that we stick to. If that kid wakes up sick, your schedule is changed for the rest of the day, maybe even the rest of the week. You and I wake up each day and adjust to the needs of the people around us. And so this idea that I'm going to wake up every day and do my ice bath, like, why am I trying to do this? This isn't my life. This isn't the spiritual path for me. This doesn't fit my life as a woman at all. And so this feminine side of spirituality is the thing that really propelled my spiritual life. And from the outside, it truly looks like nothing special. I don't do yoga every morning. I don't have a regular meditation practice. I don't do long retreats. I have very young children. My spiritual practice now is much more alive in my life. And this is what the feminine spirituality, the embodied spirituality, has always pointed to. And certainly the plant medicine, and especially women in this space who do guiding, have had a long history in this embodied spirituality of just being awake when you're looking at your partner or your child, being awake when you're doing the dishes, being awake when you take a walk, being awake at any moment that you can come back to yourself and just truly have eyes wide open and really being awake to the preciousness of the moment that you have. When I really started to lean into that and let go of the shoulds, just that should brain, I was able to completely shut that down and find the flow of my life. My most regular meditation now is one breath that I take before my kids get off the bus so I can prepare myself for the emotional onslaught that's about to happen. It's just those little things throughout my day that really keep me awake and alive and connected and present. And when you look at my life, you would just see a mom of four who doesn't do anything particularly spiritual. He doesn't have a regular anything, but on the inside, I'm very awake throughout my day. And it's really the feminine embodied side of spirituality that helped to awaken that for me, that it's the doing list is just to point to that place. You don't actually need to do that list of shoulds. I still can't sit cross-legged, on a mat like a meditation teacher. And I wanted to. For years, I would try to stretch so that I could sit like that. And I still can't. I have a bad knee. I still can't do that. And letting go of the shoulds, especially for women, and just awaking and just really paying attention to your embodied experience and the things that make you come alive and your own reminders, because everybody's reminders to that place are going to be different, and digging into that from the ground up rather than this to-do list or stories or those kind of things was a big turning point for me.
I was one of those 5 a.m.ers.
Good for you.
120 burpees, 12 minutes of jump rope. I had this list called my non-negotiables. I did a earth medicine and came back from that earth medicine, and I never went back to that schedule. And it was fascinating because I was like, wait, I thought it was supposed to do the opposite, because now in the psychedelic space, there's all this conversation about how psychedelics can be used for optimization. And so, of course, we're like westernizing it again.
Yes.
Like, we're just going to...
gross.
And I said to my teacher, it's really interesting. I was like very disciplined. I was very like stoic oriented and really honed all my practices. And she said, maybe those weren't actually fulfilling you. Maybe they weren't part of the path. With that came the reconnection to the body and reconnection to the moment in a deeper way, connected to the body. For you, what was your experience with earth medicines, and were they part of this path for you in your spiritual evolution and deconstruction and reconstruction?
Yeah, so mine would be 2 parts. So philosophy itself and these ideas that just blow up your identity and what you think is going on. That was much more of my deconstruction process. I know sometimes people experience some of these things in psychedelics and it helps them to deconstruct. Ideas themselves had already done that for me. So
to give someone an example, what were some of the self-inquiries or ideas where you had a moment of like, wait a second, what is this? What was one of those ideas or a couple of those?
Yeah. This is kind of a warning too, that some of these things you need to wait until you're in a good mental headspace to do it. So there was one time where I had young children, and I'm still in this list of, I know that spirituality would help me. I know I'm really suffering. I want to get a better routine. I want to, and there's a lot of male gurus in the spiritual space who talk about dissolving the ego and how important it is for your spiritual journey to dissolve your ego. Now, what I didn't know at the time is that if you are a woman who's wiping butts all day, you don't need more ego dissolution. Like, you don't even feel like a human or an adult anymore. Yeah. Now, I didn't know that because I didn't have any female guides saying, I don't think that's what you need right now. Like, you're not a CEO who is suffering from too much ego. That's not where you are in your life. You are literally cleaning up poop all day. Like, if anything, we need to build your ego. But at the time I was thinking, oh, there's a lot of gurus right now. There's a lot of meditation people that are doing these ego dissolving activities where you just undo the sense that you're separate from everything else, and you undo the sense that you are a person that's sitting behind your eyes, driving your body. You can actually dissolve that illusion. And so there's one meditation called the headless meditation. It's very popular. It's very well known, where you move your attention around your head until the illusion that you're a self sitting behind your eyes dissipates. And all that is just world. It's just consciousness and objects and consciousness, and you just completely dissolve the self. This is without drugs. So the concept that I'm a Brittney Hartley is just totally like, I don't even have an anchor for that idea in this space. I remember just looking at my hand, and instead of saying, there's my hand, I said, oh, it's a hand. Because the idea that I'm doing this or this is a me, I totally dissolved that. It was about a 2-hour long guided meditation. I shouldn't have been doing it. I was way too mentally unstable to be doing this. It's not what I needed at all.
No, because it can be really destabilizing.
It can be. And this is, again, when we miss the feminine voice of like, hey, actually, sometimes it's your spiritual practice to build an ego. Right. I had never even heard that before because I didn't have enough access to feminine spirituality to be able to say, oh, actually, do you have too much ego, or do you actually need to build up your ego because you have too little right now, because you don't even feel like a person? For about 4 days, I was a little bit psychologically unhinged, where it felt like there's a hand instead of that's my hand. And it's not what I needed at the time. And so some of it was ideas, some of it's free will, some of it's God. I would say the darkest thought that I had at that time was, if we have no free will and life is inherently violent, we have to kill in order to eat. Even vegans, you can't escape this. You have to kill conscious life in order to live. And so if life is inherently violent and I didn't consent into this, there's no other way that I can see this. I can't step outside my evolution. Then I'm essentially just caught in this robot that is inherently violent. And the most moral thing for me to do would be to opt out of this universe that I didn't consent into. Now, for about a year, I was like, I see no other way around that thought loop. I was literally just wake up, keep my children alive, keep it going, go to bed. Oof. So, I mean, very, very dark. And so for me, psychedelics was not a part of my deconstruction at all. I was at the depths of deconstruction. I had nothing left. I was a total dissociated zombie at that point. For me, what psychedelics did was two things. One, it just helped as far as mental health and dissociative depression. Like, it really just gave me a mental boost that I needed.
And what medicine did that?
Psilocybin, specifically about a 4 to 6 milligram dose of psilocybin really helps dissociative depression. It can just give you a nervous system reset. So that's part of it. You know, sometimes you just need to be able to get outside yourself.
For somebody who's listening who wonders about a psilocybin experience, what was yours like that did that reset for you? Do you remember it? And were you new to psychedelics or?
I was aware of psychedelics. I was aware of the studies, and I don't drink. I don't smoke. I have some addiction issues in my family that have kept me away from some of those things. Obviously, you can hear from talking to me that my brain tends towards the neurotic. So I knew enough about myself to know that would be a bad idea for me. I, in general, was not an exploratory person when it came to drugs, but the studies, especially coming out of Johns Hopkins, were so convincing that I knew I wanted to try it at some point. But it took me a couple years to find a guide that I really trusted, and an environment and a time and a whatever. I would say by the time I wanted to do it till the time I did it was maybe about 3 years, until I really found someone that I truly trusted to guide me in this space. And for me, what that looked like was, in the psychedelic experience, I felt like how I was as a kid. So just endlessly curious in all directions. I was asking my guide to ask me questions, like ask me to spell something. I want to see if I can spell in this state that I'm in. Just have this childlike curiosity and playfulness. It was just really connected to my inner child, and just that joy and wonder of just being alive and just playing and what's going on. And I can see colors differently. And when I look at this tree, it kind of looks like something, and stories come to my mind. And I hadn't felt like that probably since puberty, to be honest, where just that inner child joy and wonder. Now, coming out of the trip was very difficult for me, because it felt like that curious little child and all the questions that she was asking. It felt like then growing up in a space of 10 minutes as I was coming out of it, and the existential dread slowly coming back of the answers to the questions that I had been seeking that were hard for me. And I felt like I was drowning. I cried and I mourned, and my guide held me. And it was a very difficult landing process for me. And then the next day, I felt a huge depression boost. So just mentally, I felt fantastic. And so even just for mental health, it may be something that I do from time to time if my dissociative depression shows up. But then also it connected me to this thing that we're talking about, of maybe there's another way to be than being in my head and obsessing about these ideas that are very depressing, where I'm getting lost. I don't want to avoid that. I don't want to pretend that those things aren't real and try to delude myself. But maybe there's a different way to look at this. And that is what psychedelics helped me with. It's, when you're stuck in thought loops that you can't think yourself out of because you're the one who thought yourself into that space. Psychedelics, for me, it was that falling of new snow where I could go in a different way. I could stand on different ground. I could look at this harsh truth or this harsh reality that I was dealing with and see it in a different light, and find some playfulness in it, and find some wonder in it, and find some reconnection to my body, and find some wonder in exploring my subconscious and what I am and who I am and the universe around me. So for me, psychedelics was much more a part of my reconstruction process of finding that place of being, and that inner child place, and that wonder place, and that playfulness place, and that connected place, and doing it even in the face of these harsh truths, but finding some different ground to be able to see it. So I did quite a few trips during that time. I would say for the first couple years, I did maybe 3 or 4 a year. And now, I haven't done one in longer than a year. It's not as helpful for me now as it was before, when I really needed to find this different ground on which to stand.
So in a lot of ways, it sounds like it was a real reset. It
was a reset. And Sam Harris talks about this a lot, that it can give you this knowledge that there's another way of being than the neurotic way that you've been. And for me now, I'm much more interested in what are the little ways that I can cue myself into that space, rather than having to be dependent on a drug to be there. Because I do see that happen in the psychedelic world, where you're chasing the next trip, you're chasing the next spiritual high experience. And the drug itself essentially becomes the drug by which you are being able to cope with life, right?
Yeah, you can almost see two things: that, or the cycle of continuing to heal the trauma, which is also, I think, another pattern.
It can become an escape to always try to go back and heal the trauma, because you have control over that. You have a sense of like, I know what happened and I need to fix it. And that can keep you distracted from the things that, in your life that you're maybe running from in your current experience. So there are definitely lots of rabbit holes that you can get caught in with psychedelics. There are red flags. There are things to be aware of that a good guide will help you to be able to watch for. So for me now, it's a tool that I use from time to time when I feel like this would be a benefit. But now I kind of plan on using it as a tool when I need it and trying to find ways during my day to cue myself into that space, because you don't need the drug for any of these psychedelic spaces. Anywhere you go on drugs is a part of your brain you can go to without. The drugs are just a shortcut to say, hey, this place exists over here where you're not suffering so much. And so I'm much more interested now in what are the ways to help me. I've already walked into this room in my mind. Can I walk there now with my sober mind? Can I wake up to it when I'm doing the dishes? Can I go into this space when I'm with a child instead of always having to go on retreat to do it? I'm much more interested in that now, and I do less psychedelics now, but it was a
Did you
helpful
use
tool.
any other psychedelic than mushrooms? Was there any other psychedelic on your path?
No, there may be one or two combinations that I'm willing to try that are on my to-do list when the time is right. My youngest child's 5, and I also live in a part of the country where, legality is still an issue.
Yeah.
So there's maybe one or two combinations that if the stars aligned that I'd be open to. But because I need it less now, the last maybe 2 times that I did a psilocybin trip, I really didn't get anything out of it because it's like, oh, I know where I am. I've been to this place before. I know how to get here.
Did the experiences at all redefine for you what consciousness is, what this universe is? You deconstructed God. Sometimes there is somewhat of a psychedelic spirituality that almost emerges through psychedelics, that maybe these earth medicines are teaching us about what this reality is. Did you find that at all?
Yes and no. So I will say that there's a study that was done that showed that 2/3 of atheists who do a hero's dose of psilocybin no longer self-identify as atheists after that experience. Now, they don't jump into something like Mormonism or Catholicism.
Right.
That's not where they go. But they seem to not have that staunch atheistic, pure materialism, maybe stance that they had before that experience, because they get to sit in this place of beingness, which feels different. It just has a different quality of experience. Now, for me, as someone who's still a thinker, who's a skeptic, who's had, spiritual and religious trauma, who has gone through so many different belief systems in my life and ways of constructing things that I build up and that eventually crumble, I don't jump on board with this idea that psychedelics are teaching us something about ultimate reality. I'm much more leaning towards this is something happening in the brain. But I love this imagery that you get from the end of Harry Potter where Harry says, is this real or is this just happening in my head? And just Dumbledore laughs and says, just because it's happening in your head, why does that mean that it's not real? I'm very wary of ultimate reality claims that we make based on subjective experience. So for me, the safety in spiritual spaces comes from saying, is this a subjective experience or a subjective truth? And staying in that place rather than saying, because this is my subjective experience, therefore X about objective reality. That to me is just where spirituality and religion go wrong. That because I have this experience, therefore God is on my side and I'm going to start this crusade. Because I feel this, therefore the Book of Mormon is true. Because I feel this, therefore there are 13 dimensions and I'm going to write a book and I'm going to teach everybody about the dimensions and the aliens that I spoke to on DMT and blah, blah, blah. We're so flawed as humans. Even if one of those was right, statistically, you're never going to find it. It's not you. Statistically, it's not you. So to me, I find much more green flags than red flags in spirituality by saying, how can I improve the quality of my experience? How can I experience things like love and compassion and oneness and beingness and awakeness and gratitude? I don't want to play the game anymore of because I feel this, therefore some statement about ultimate reality. I just think we need to stop playing that game because we're so bad at it and because we're always wrong. We look back and we're always wrong. We look back at all of that, even with psychedelics, and say, that's not quite right. Like that, they were misled. And yet it's just human pride that says, oh, everybody else in human history was wrong about their gods, but I'm sure like this one is the one. And my particular view of this particular God, I've found the truth. Like, I just think we need to stop doing that.
So how did you come out of your nihilism? Did you have a moment where there was a shift? It doesn't sound like psychedelics was part of that shift, but was there a moment where it's like, okay, there's no free will, there's no God, there's no self. I don't know what this is. Where do I go from here?
Yeah, there was a shift. It was kind of two things happening at the time. One was when I knew nothing and when I was in this really dissociated place, there was still something in my body that said that my children mattered. And that was a kind of anchor for me. Because to me, I was in this place of nothing matters and I'm quite suicidal at the time. And intellectually, logically, I knew that this is all a Truman Show. All of this is stupid. I'm just angry all the time because of how stupid everything is. And yet, when my child comes home from their first day of kindergarten, my body is literally screaming at me, this is meaningful. It doesn't matter if the earth blows up eventually and there's no record of any of this and nobody cares, the universe doesn't care. It doesn't matter. My body is literally screaming at me, I don't care that the universe doesn't care. I care. This moment with my child where they're looking for your face when they get out of kindergarten, they want to tell you about their day. I still was in my body enough as a mother that my body was screaming at me, there's something meaningful happening that you're missing. Now, my logical brain couldn't make sense of that. My logical brain had no way to make sense that that was meaningful, but my body did. My body knew that it was meaningful. So I was holding on to that. There was something there. And then for me, it was really reading the philosophy of Albert Camus, who's an absurdist, who spent some time in this place, in the void. And something that really helped me is this idea of the myth of Sisyphus. I think it's behind me on my shelf somewhere. It's at the top here. This guy, if you're watching this guy pushing the stone up the hill over and over, even though it's meaningless. And there's this idea that if life is just sandcastles and you know the wave is going to come and take the sandcastle away, then the meaningful thing that we need to do is ask ourselves the question, what are the kinds of sandcastles that we want to build just because of the experience? Because that's how we were as children. If you and I were both 6 years old at the beach, we wouldn't be having this conversation of like, how do we wake up and make our life meaningful? Right. We would get our buckets and we would make a sandcastle and we'd build a moat, and we would know that eventually that sandcastle, we know it's not going to last till the end of the day. We know that. Mm-hmm. We don't care. We wouldn't give a shit. We would make our little moat, and when the wave came in,
feel the sand.
We'd feel the sand.
We'd
find a stick to make a little flag. We would be so in our bodies, immersed in this playfulness and immersed in this wonder that we literally don't care if we came back to the beach a year from now and our sandcastle was gone. We wouldn't care about that because you and I playing and making that sandcastle would be so enjoyable that we would do it anyway. And we'd do it again. And so the question that really gave me my first foothold for climbing out of the space was, if life is building sandcastles, what is the kind of sandcastles I want to build just for the pure joy and wonder of the experience? And what that did is it forced me back into my body because I had to pay attention to, what is that for me? I don't know what that is for me. And because I'm in this space where I've like destroyed my identity, it was kind of a discovery of, I'm in this particular meat flesh suit that likes to do some things more than others. I want to discover then, what are the kinds of things that resonate with this body? What is the way that this body likes to play? And that is the thought that was my first foothold that then gave me a path, because then I could see, oh, there's this life over here where I get to talk about these things with people, maybe even make a career out of it. I had no idea how to do that, but there was at least the idea of that. And deep relationships where I could have a conversation like this with women at dinner, and this would be totally normal dinner conversation for my girlfriends now, but not at the time. I didn't have those friends yet.
Yeah.
But I could at least see a life out there with conversation and with learning and with my children and with watching my shows that I love. Like, I'm watching Game of Thrones right now. And could I curate a life that I want to live just for the ride? And that gave me, like, I'm point A over here, and that gave me a point B, that there's a life over there. And the great thing, the reason that I get excited about working with clients who are in rock bottom is once you're already dead, like if someone doesn't like you, oh my God, it's so freeing. Like if someone doesn't like you, and if someone tells you to go to hell, like that you're going to hell or whatever they want to tell you, like I've already died. What are you going to do to me that I haven't done to myself?
The discovery, right? It's almost like rediscovering the sensorial field. You know, taste, touch, sound.
And resonance too. Like sometimes your body just buzzes. Like
Sometimes
in this conversation,
it moves away
my
from
body
somebody.
is very alive. Like right now, the reason that I do these podcasts is not because I'm going to change the world and I'm going to make so much money by getting my name out. Like my body is so alive in this moment because I'm so enjoying our conversation. And yet with other things, my body's like, I am so bored. I'm not feeling this at all. And so when I let go of the things that other people were doing and the shoulds and all of that, and just really paid attention to my embodied experience, that did give me a path of actually, if I can build my life around these things, that the ways that I play, the ways that I feel alive.
I remember as a woman, a therapist at one point saying to me, "What do you want?" And I was like, huh? I was like a puppy dog tilting my head like I had no idea what he was asking. It was like, what? It's like, well, what do you want? What's your request? And I was like, what?
Especially as mothers.
As mothers.
Like so much of you, even without deconstruction, as a mother of young children, I was already dying in some ways anyway. And the deconstruction was like the cherry on top. But you're right. I remember the first time that I ordered the kind of pizza that I like, because it had literally been since my first son was born. And it's like nobody asked me to do it. It just becomes this thing where the easiest thing for you to do in a family as a woman is to not have any needs. That's actually the path of least resistance. Like that's the easiest thing for you to do is to disappear. And so I remember the first time, I'm almost 40 years old now, and I was ordering pizza with pineapple and pepperoni and nobody else likes it. And I, always just got the pepperoni for my kids, and I got Hawaiian for my husband and whatever. And I realized like, oh my God, like I've totally disappeared. I don't even remember what I like anymore.
You become it's like you almost become so attuned to what everybody else wants and needs.
Yeah.
As you said, to keep everybody else happy.
Yes. And I actually had a mushroom experience once where I was mentally struggling with just the demands of young children. And in this mushroom experience, I was laying on the ground and my children were eating me. And I was being eaten alive.
Wow.
And I went back home and I told my husband, I went to have this experience, and the insight that I got coming from this experience is I'm losing myself and I'm dying. And I need help in order to be able to put up some kind of wall where me as a person is allowed to exist in this family structure, and I need help doing it because I'm dying. Because the imagery in this trip was that my children were eating me alive. It's like my body screaming at me.
And we're not
like,
even allowed to really talk about that as women.
No, because then it's selfish, or then it's I'm not grateful or whatever. And it's like I was dying, and also my children deserve to have a person, not just an empty shell of a person. And also I have 2 daughters. I don't want them to think that motherhood is as soon as a kid is born, then you're dead, then you die. I didn't want that to be what they think motherhood should be either. So I had to actually go in, and you have to intentionally carve out space, because the easiest go with the flow situation is if you don't have any needs, then it's the easiest, and then you lose yourself. And I think we all do that as mothers.
Yeah. So I have a question that I'm curious about what your thought is on this, because I feel like this place of coming back to the body, really getting to a place where I'm not sure really what this mystery is, but the real presence of the visceral experience of life. And I'm curious in your own work, because I feel like there's not a path, there's not one path, but that some of the conditioning through life and the traumas that we experience along the way, that there's some density in the body that it leaves, some pattern in the brain, that to actually get to the place of being awake to the touch of your child's hand on your face, awake to the breeze of like, wow, this is so beyond spirituality as I knew it. This is so beyond dogma. This death process in some ways has to happen, like that this deconstruction process is necessary. The dark night of the soul almost has to happen to get to that place. What's your thought on that?
For this, I really look at the work of Abraham Maslow. We have this pyramid of hierarchy of needs, and at the top of that, he put self-actualization, which is just becoming the person that you've wanted to be. But before he died, he was talking about, he was discovering that there was something beyond that. There were people that he was meeting that weren't just like checking off a list of everything that they wanted to become, that they had become what he called self-transcendent. And there were even degrees within that. So some were becoming self-transcendent themselves, and then some were in a place where they had done that and were now helping others with that. And so there are even degrees within that pyramid. And he died before he could publish it. And so in all our books, we just have the pyramid with self-actualization, right? Which really works for capitalism too, to become, the CEO of whatever you want to become. And really, he was noticing there was this element of spirituality where there was these people that were in this flow, and they were connected and they were awake, and they had let go of this goal setting. So an example that I use is, maybe you want to be a good mother. And that's kind of a self-actualization role, because I want to be a good mother. And that's still more about you, right? And someone who's really transcended just the goal setting of wanting to be a good mother to focusing on the relationship, right? That I want to be present in this moment with this other person that we're both exploring and discovering together. Now, that's less about me and my goals of being good and being seen as a good mother. And that's more about actually, I'm making this space where it's not just me and not just you, but I'm making this space where it's us and we're exploring. I'm being a parent for the first time and you're a child for the first time, and we're in this relationship, and I'm just so present and enjoying exploring who and what you are with you at the same time. That's different than the goal of I want to be seen as a good mother. And so he was noticing that. And the interesting thing that I also find with that is, because we only see this in later stages of human development, you actually do have to have an ego first. And so I find that to be really interesting. So in order to have the psychological safety to have the kind of death that we're talking about, ego kinds of death, you actually have to have psychological safety to do that from earlier stages. And so someone who's never had identity, belonging, safety in their childhood, if you've had a really rough, go, you actually aren't psychologically stable enough to jump into the chaos place that we're talking about. So it seems like with human development, the most natural thing, if you want to talk about progressing through stages of human development and not getting stuck in one because of trauma, what we see is that the healthiest thing for you to do is to build an ego, like especially when you're kids. I'm a person and I belong to this family, and I'm good at tennis and I do this and I'm really kind. It's really, really healthy. It's really healthy. And especially as women, sometimes we don't finish that process. We actually have to go back and finish that process. Right? And so we go back, you have to build that ego first. But then once you build it, like clothing, then you're actually in a place of psychological safety enough to let it go, to say, I'm still exploring what I am. There's still things in my subconscious I'll never probably learn about myself, but you can keep exploring that universe within. You can change. You can change parts of your identity. You can do all kinds of things. So I think it is healthy to build an ego, and I think it's healthy when you can let it go and have it be flexible, where it's doing what it needs to do to keep you psychologically stable, but also you can let it go and explore and be flexible and grow. And the awareness comes in, where are you on that spectrum? And that's where having female guides especially help me, because so much of the conversation in spirituality is you have too much ego. We got to kill it. We got to kill it. And for women, I've never met a woman where we didn't have to go back and actually do some inner child work and some ego building, because they needed that far more than they needed ego dissolving.
What is it like for you to serve earth medicines? What's that experience like?
I really love the opportunities that I'm able to do that for someone else. The people who come to see me are the people who resonate with me, right? Because the guide should be someone that you trust and resonate with. And so usually these are people who are curious about psychedelics, but they're skeptical, because when you're in such a vulnerable place, that if you're having a feeling and someone says to you what you're feeling is God and God is calling you back and you need to go back to church or something, you're in a very vulnerable place. Like that could be very powerful. Spiritual people can sometimes project their own beliefs onto you.
To me, is one of the most important things not to do in medicine space. To put any of your own spiritual or ideology on somebody else, it's such harm.
Yeah, it's such harm. And so the people who come to me trust that I'm not going to BS them. I'm not going to put any beliefs of mine onto their experience, and that we're just going to hold this space together. And the thing that for me is so interesting is it's almost like an active dream space where we get to work in this symbolic archetypal space of, why did this come up for you and what does this mean for you? And so what's meaningful for me on multiple levels is I really love helping someone in a place where I previously was stuck. So that gives me a lot of meaning and purpose. It's just part of my meaning and purpose. It connects me to others. And also something that would take us 10 years to get to in sessions, talking it out with our conscious mind. It's so much faster to be able to do it in a session, because we're working with that thing directly. And we can also process faster because we have some neuroplasticity or whatever's going on with our brain, where we're able to just process it faster. And so some people really do call it 10 years of therapy. For me, it's a service in the sense that it gives me meaning and purpose, but it's also, I've never been bored even for a second during someone's. Could you imagine being bored? I mean, it is the most interesting thing.
Fascinating.
That I could do with my day.
Right? You talked about meaning, and I remember that question. What would you do? And you'd actually love it so much you'd pay to do it. That's how much joy you get out of the experience of it. And I'm not going to lie, it's tiring too.
Yeah, and I don't get to do it as often as I'd like because it's so time consuming.
And energetically really draining.
Energetically draining.
But
you have to be really present.
What a gift to explore those realms with another human being.
Yeah.
And
it's very sacred. And I'm bonded with these people forever afterwards. I'm going into your deepest places. We're going to explore it together. And people who come to me are people who are skeptical and want to feel like they can trust someone in that situation. It was just really natural for me to do with the work that I was already doing, because I was already working in these archetypal symbolic spaces. I'd had so much training in religion and in spirituality to play in these subconscious spaces and make sense of it, that it was just a really natural fit for what I was already doing. And you can do so much in such a small amount of time. So
do you get many people who have religious trauma coming to you to heal religious trauma? Yeah.
Yeah, quite a bit. And, people will sometimes make an intention. I don't usually have them do that, because you and I both know that the reason that we do this is because we're not going where our conscious mind intends us to go. The last time I guided someone, he was like, "Can I share with you my intentions? Does this help?" And I was like, I want to hear the intentions because I just want to know more about you going into this. And so it's helpful for me. But I promise you we're not going where you're wanting to go. But that's the point of doing it, is letting go of your conscious mind and working directly with things that are brimming under the surface of your attention. And so I've never had a single client go to where they intended to go, but sometimes it can help a guide know where you're at in your life in general, and maybe intentions can be a part of that. It can help also ease anxiety, which can be helpful going into it because we want to calm down that anxiety response. I still have a little bit every time I do it because you're letting go of control, and there's a part of my brain that doesn't like that.
Do you ever have anxiety serving medicine?
Yeah, that's a good question. I'm always hoping that there's a good experience. I've never had someone say that they regret doing it, and so I still always hope for that. I would say the times that I get the most nervous is someone who's been, not with me, but with their psychologist, psychiatrist. They've been weaning off SSRIs, and they're weaning off a coping tool that they've had, so they're mentally taking a risk here. I'm most afraid for those for whom they've had some depression or other mental health issues. We're hoping that this is going to be something that's a better tool for them. I've known many people who have weaned off SSRIs and stayed off SSRIs, that they just maybe do this every 6 months or sometimes people microdose, whatever. Some people find it more effective for whatever they were using SSRIs for. Some people will go back on their SSRIs after. But I would say that population I worry about the most, because you can't just get off your medication for a day, try this, see if it works, and then hop back on your medication. There's a little bit of a risk period there. Yeah. And so for that, I'm never doing that on my own. They're doing that with their therapist and their psychiatrist, and I'm just a piece of that team. But that population worries me the most because they're having to take a risk.
Do you see earth medicines or psychedelics as tools for families, for couples, for healing any relational dynamics?
You know, there's something that's called the silver thread when people do this together. There's something really special about being that naked with another person, which is why there's such intimacy even between the guide and the person who's taking the journey. I don't know if you could, intend that you both make the intention that you're going to heal this wound between you, and the mushrooms are just going to magically take you there. I think it's more complex than that. There's various things going on in their inner child and your inner child. And so that can be difficult, but I have seen people, friends and or lovers and or strangers, really increase intimacy and their capacity for intimacy by being that naked. And so I wouldn't say that, I'm addicted to psychedelics, but one thing that I did get addicted to when I was doing it more often, I would be doing it either with a guide or with a small group, and we'd come afterwards and talk about our experiences. And you're still in a place where your ego's not fully online, so you're being really, really open and vulnerable. And I wasn't addicted to the drug or the experience, but I did get a little bit of addicted to that level of honesty and vulnerability. And for me, I just want to jump right into that place with people. I just want to jump straight there. For some people, they need a little bit of help to get there. For relationships, there is something really magical about being that naked and open and vulnerable and being seen and loved and accepted in that space. I don't think you need psychedelics forever afterwards to get there, but it can show you what deep intimacy looks like so that you can lean into that more in your relationships.
When you said earlier, you can see some combinations that you might want to explore. What are those?
Yeah, I had a friend who did, I think it's called the hippie flip, where there's some combinations of MDMA and psilocybin, and sometimes even LSD. And again, because I'm trying to use these things as tools.
It's actually a good tool, sometimes combining the two.
Yeah, it's something that I'd be more interested in.
Yeah,
I'm curious if that would help me, because I'm a headspace kind of person, that maybe it would open up some love channels that you can more easily tap back into after the experience. So that's something that I may do in the future, because I can go into a lot of these places with my sober mind.
Yeah.
I'm just not as called to you know how hard it is on your body. Like if this was just taking an ibuprofen and you just had an experience for 20 minutes, maybe it'd be different. But I mean, it's taking a weekend away from my family. It's very hard on my body. I feel physically sick afterwards. I usually have a headache afterwards. It was instrumental in getting to the place where I am now. But in the future, there may be retreats or combinations that I'm open to trying.
Are you still fascinated by reality and the conversations of what the heck is this and what is consciousness?
Yeah, more than anything else.
Me too.
I did have to mourn not knowing. I would say the thing that I mourn about dying is I deeply mourn not knowing how this ends. That still hurts me. I still mourn that. I'm such a story person. I'm such a language person, and I'm a history teacher, so I have at least some sense of what's been going on with human history and this human story that I'm a part of, and this is the chapter that I'm in now. Knowing that I'm a part of a bigger story that's more complex than can possibly be imagined, and not knowing how it ends, I still mourn that.
I think too, as a truth seeker, like mourning, I always thought like, oh, I'm just going to follow the clues and eventually
I'll figure it out.
I'm going to figure this thing out. From like, is it a simulation? Go down simulation theory to like quantum realities. And then the realization, there's no knowing.
Yeah, and that was painful for me at first. If I'm a truth seeker and we're not interacting with truth, or we don't know, then it destroys your identity, because if I'm a truth seeker and there's no truth, then what am I? So there was a part of me that had to die in that process, but the thing that brought it back to life was realizing, what if I don't have to do this because I have to know or I'm going to know? What if this is how I play? And that thought just really shifted something for me in saying, this truth thing is how you and I are building sandcastles like children right now. Just both enjoying the hell out of it.
Right, exactly.
For a while, I just like stopped reading books. I stopped listening to podcasts. I was like, we don't know anything about anything. And I'm so bored with this now, because I don't believe that we're getting any closer to truth. But that came back for me when I shifted into play, which is something that mystics, whether it be mushroom mystics or Christian mystics or Sufi mystics of any tradition, really talk about, is this shift into play and wonder. And so for me, that's when the truth came back, because I realized this is the game that I most love to play.
When we think of religion and maybe the reasons why religions were constructed and certain gods were designed and created, ultimately, I think it was for liberation of some kind. Not only a deep, maybe wanting to know ourselves and the world, but in a lot of ways, a lot of the religious structures did the complete opposite, created cages to live in. And when you talk about liberation, the freedom to play, building sandcastles, explore like, hey, what does this character like? When does my body come alive? When does it not come alive? That's like a completely different type of living life, which that's probably what the mystics were all pointing to. Another type of liberation, of freedom to just be in the beingness of the moment, to be in the infinite now, in a way that potentially faith traditions aren't necessarily pointing to.
Some people will ask me, you're an atheist, you spent your entire adult life studying religion. Like, was that a waste? And I say, absolutely not. Everything I learned about human nature is from studying what we did with religion, because religion was it was a reflection of our fears, of our desires. It was a reflection of our psyche. When you look at something like Greek mythology, we still use it as a matter of understanding human psychology, because we essentially projected out all the facets of human psychology into this complex world of gods in order to try to understand ourselves. Everything that I've come to understand about human nature, for me, was studying how we projected our gods and what was going on in the society, and also what's going on in our brains to be able to project the kind of stories and gods that we were doing. And there's wisdom in studying those things, even if those gods aren't capital R real. They're real in a way in a sense that our subconscious is creating these stories that last, even biblical stories that last generation after generation. You know, if you tried to write a story that would be told 2,000 years from now, it's actually really hard to do. It's really something interesting in your subconscious, in our collective subconscious, that has to happen there for it to be that interesting to be told around campfires generation after generation. And so all of that is still fascinating for me, even if I don't believe these gods are real.
Have you ever had the experience of, whether it's just sitting or where reality itself withers away and the material isn't material and the empty space isn't empty space, and it's just hard to describe what's here?
I'm much more careful now about picking and choosing when to dive into some of those places, because I do have children. And so I'm much better now at being balanced, because when you're too into the minutia of life, you get neurotic. Oh, I got to make dinner and I got to pick up blah, blah, blah. And you're just focused down into the minutia of your life. But if you get too much out into, this is a Truman Show and none of this is actually real, and all that seems to be real is consciousness and objects and consciousness, and these are just sensations and all of that, well, then actually my kids are going to go out with dinner because I'm lost in God knows where, you know, sitting on my mat or whatever I'm doing. I've found that the right flow for me is the space in between, where I can be making dinner, I'm chopping something, whatever I'm doing, and I can also have one eye that's still aware of the preciousness of this moment, that maybe my child asked to be picked up, and maybe as a 5-year-old, this may be the last time that my kid is at an age where I can pick them up and hold them to my chest the way that little children do. One day you pick up your kid for the last time and you don't even know it. And so to precious. Me, it's so precious. And I'm not always in this place, right? No one is. No one is always in that place. It's not possible. It's like a breath. You return to it, right? It's a practice. But to me, that flow of life is the reason why the I in spirituality shows up everywhere. In the Eastern religions and Western religions, there's this concept of an I, or a third eye, or the eye of God, or awareness, because it's this concept of, I'm seeing the dinner that I'm making, and I'm also seeing that this may be one of the last times that my 5-year-old asked to be picked up, and I'm holding both in my mind's eye. Now, I'm not always in that place, but if I can at least try to tap into that once a day, then
and I'm hearing the sound, and I'm feeling the tomato that I'm cutting, and I'm viscerally present with just this.
I'm awake. And truly, I am not always in that space. I would even say there's times where I'm in a day where maybe I'm very attuned to that, or I'm very aware of that. But I would say most of the time, multiple times throughout the day, I just get a glimpse of that, right? And then you get lost in the whatever, and then a little glimpse, and it's kind of a flow, it's kind of a breath, and you try to return to it. But I used to go long periods of time where I was in my neurotic brain, and then I'd get to glimpse into that awe space, and I would go months, in between those kinds of experiences. But for me now, it's much more, I get those little almost microdose experiences a couple times a day.
Yeah.
And so I'm never very far from that. I'm never very far from myself. And a lot of that is really opening up to that feminine embodied spirituality of, how can I not just get this on retreat or with psychedelics or whatever tool that I was using? How can I cue this multiple times a day for me so that I'm never far from it? And that was something that was really powerful.
Well, thank you so much for being here today. I bet you are such a support to people going through this path, because when you hit that dark night, or you hit nihilism, or suddenly reality is different than what you thought, there's not many spaces that are out there. Luckily, there is more today, but I bet you're such a support to people in that process, and coming from a place of, I don't know, versus the guru who's going to be, oh, why don't you come to me? I'll tell you how it is. Mm-hmm. So what a beautiful expression of neutrality and just openness and being in the mystery of the sandcastles.
Thank you so much. I so enjoyed our morning and building this playing with you. And
Yeah.
I so rarely get to go to the space that we went to with other women, and there's a quality to that was really special for me today, and especially as a mother, because not only are some of these conversations more rare because you can get into these philosophical places that tend to be male dominated, but being able to talk about this with honesty, where like, hey, I was going through this while I was still just changing diapers and trying to keep my kids alive. If you were my friend at that time and we
Right.
could have talked openly about like, hey, I'm in the Truman Show. You see on the internet, and lots of
Right.
young men will talk about the Matrix and the Truman Show and the blue pill and the red pill. Talk to me about it when you're a mom of four. Like
Right.
it has a different element. And so having a friend like you during that time honestly would have like saved my life. Like it would
Yeah.
have saved me.